Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is Tiffany with Healthy Passions. If you do not know me, I am a certified personal trainer, certified wellness coach, certified energy healer, and by birth, I am an oracle prophetess and a natural healer. Today, I am going to do an unscheduled video to get these commandments out. It's taking forever. and I just want to make sure that everybody has their studying list. And if you haven't heard it before, what I'm going to do is say the commandment and then I'm going to say the verse. You're going to have to pause the video, write the commandment down, write down the chapter and verses in the scripture that it's in, and then go back and actually look at it for yourself. So we left off on business practices. So we are at 170, and that's where I'm going to continue. I went ahead and put the other one from yesterday in the playlist, and I'm going to try to make sure to do it right after. If I don't, I'll do it eventually, but I'll make sure that all of these are in the playlist for the 613 commandments, right? So let's get started. So today's section is going to be business practices. All right. So 170 is the number we're going to start at. 170. Not to do wrong in buying or selling. Not to do wrong in buying or selling. So that's going to be Leviticus 25:14. Leviticus 25:14. All right. 171. Not to make a loan to an Israelite on interest. Not to make a loan to an Israelite on interest. Leviticus 25:37. Leviticus 25:37. You might hear my son in there. He's doing his YouTube thing right now. So you might hear him. He's a little loud sometimes. All right. So that is going to be not to make a loan to an Israelite on interest. So if we are doing a loan to another Israelite within the 12 tribes of Israel, your people, we don't put interest on it, right? Um, and that's going to be found in Leviticus 25:37. But you will find later on in this that you what loans you are to put interest on. So we are to help our brothers and sisters out with the no interest loans, right? When we loan to them. So they just pay back what was loaned back. So just keep that in mind as I continue. 172. Not to borrow on interest. Not to borrow on interest. Deuteronomy 23:20. Deuteronomy 23:20. So the reason why it's kind of on the side note is because this would cause the lender to sin. Remember, the commandment for Israelite is not to borrow on interest at all from another Israelite. So we also don't need to go to other nations and borrow from interest. So that would actually put us in sin. So we don't need to do that. We want to make sure that we keep our loans to one another on no interest, right? So 173. Not to take part in any unserious transactions between borrower and lender, neither as a surety, nor as a witness, nor as a writer of a bond for them. Okay, I'm going to repeat that. Not to take part in any unserious transactions between a borrower and lender, neither as a surety, nor as a witness, nor as a writer of the bond for them. This is going to be Exodus 22:24. Exodus 22:24. Number 174. Not to lend to a poor person. Not to lend to a poor person. Exodus 22:24. Exodus 22:24. Number 175, not to demand from a poor man repayment of his debt when the creditor knows that he cannot pay, nor press him. Not to demand, not to demand, yeah, thank you. All right, sorry about that. Give me 1 second. So we are at 175. I kind of got lost in my notes a little bit. All right, so 175, not to demand from a poor man repayment of his debt when the creditor knows that he cannot pay nor press him. Okay, So the first commandment is very clear. You shouldn't, if you can't afford to lose out on the money, the commandment is just not to lend to a poor man. That's Exodus 22:24. And then if you do, let's say you didn't know the person was poor, or they presented themselves having the money or the ability to make the money, but they are a poor man. If you find that the person is poor, this is the commandment: not to demand from that poor man repayment of his debt when the creditor knows he cannot pay it, nor press him. You have to just let it go. You ever heard the saying, we a lot of times we say don't lend out what you can't afford to lose. That way you won't be pressed for it, right? So that is what the Most High is saying here. Um, and I think that's very important to point out. Okay, so 176. Not to take in pledge utensils used in preparing for food. Not to take in pledge utensils used for preparing food. So Deuteronomy 24:12. You got to understand that some of these are placed in old time, but they still are in effect. Some of them we would use as history, but even today that could be done. Let's say you have a restaurant. So you got to use common sense. 179, to return a pledge to its owner. To return a pledge to its owner. Deuteronomy 24:13. Deuteronomy 24:13. Right? And then the next one, 180. Not to take a pledge from a widow. Not to take a pledge from a widow. Deuteronomy 24:17. Deuteronomy 24:17. All right? Number 182. To ensure that scales and weights are correct. To make sure that scales and weights are correct. Leviticus 19:36. Leviticus 19:36. The Most High does not want you to unknowingly or knowingly scam someone with the weights being wrong, charging them more than what it is, or giving them less than what they're owed. So you want to make sure all your equipment is correct, right? Depending on what you do for a living, right? 183. To not possess inaccurate measures and weights. Don't even possess them. If you know something's wrong with them, get them fixed or get rid of them, right? So that's going to be Deuteronomy 25:13 through 14. Deuteronomy 25:13 through 14. You have to understand that the Most High is very honest. He wants to make sure that everything is fair. I wanted to go back to 180, the one that says do not pledge to a widow. The reason why he's saying that, thank you, Holy Spirit. The reason I'm going to bring this up, you don't do a pledge or loan to a widow, because we are supposed to be using our tithes and offerings that we to give to widows and orphans and the poor. So she should not be, after losing her husband, she should not be worried about paying back a loan. We should be blessing her, meaning that we give her what she needs and that's it. She doesn't have to pay it back, right? So that's why he's saying that. All right, I just want to be clear. Churches are modern day churches are very confused on that. They like to take in all the money but not help the widows and the orphans and the poor people. So they like to hoard the money, and that's not how or what it was meant for. All right. So the next one's going to be for employees, servants, and slaves. Now, we don't use the term slaves, but there are some cases where there are indentured servitudes. So we are going to still put what's out there. This is for study. This is for knowledge. So if there is ever a case to where there's indentured servitude, this is how they're to be treated. So it's employees, servants, and slaves, right? Number 184. Not to delay payment of a hired man's wages. Not to delay payment of a hired man's wages. Leviticus 19:13. Leviticus 19:13. 185. That the hired laborer shall be permitted to eat of the produce he is reaping. Deuteronomy 23:25 through 26. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 25 through 26. Now, modern day, you can look at that as a ranch hand or a farm hand. right? They should be able to eat. But if you don't have a form, let's say you have a restaurant, I think Chick-fil-A does this, which is really good. They permit their employees to have a meal for the day, like something like that. He wants you to be fair and good to your employees, right? So 186, that the hired laborer should not take more than he can eat. Now, as the employee, you don't want to take advantage and try to glutton or take more than you need to eat from your employer. So you want to be honest on that front, because you got to understand the Most High is watching both of us when He's making sure they're documenting everything. So that the hired laborer should not take more than he can eat. That's going to be Deuteronomy 23:25. Deuteronomy 23:25. Number 187. That a hired laborer should not eat produce that is not being harvested. Deuteronomy 23:26. That a hired laborer should not eat produce that is not being harvested. Deuteronomy 23:26. So in the first commandments above that, that if you're reaping it, that means you're harvesting it, right? From 185. So you're harvesting it, then you should be able to eat from that. But if it's not being harvested and you take it and eat it, that's stealing, because the thing is, he said, well, you were reaping. So while you're working, yes, you deserve to eat from it, right? But if you're not working for that and if you're not harvesting that, then that would be considered stealing, right? We want to be honest. We want to be honest employees and honest employers, right? Especially to your own people. Number 188, to pay wages to the hired man at the due time. When the Most High, I notice when the Most High repeats something, especially in these commandments, that means that it's important. He wants you to have integrity. He wants you to pay your people on time. If you say they're going to get paid every Friday at 1 p.m., they need to be paid every Friday at 1 p.m., right? Imagine being on the other side. You've had jobs before to where they'll be like, oh, we messed up on your check. We have to pay you next week. That's wrong. Don't do that, right? So to pay wages to the hired man at the due time, Deuteronomy 24:15. Deuteronomy 24:15. Number 189. To deal, to deal, I can't pronounce this, judicially with the Hebrew bondsman in accordance with the laws appertaining to him. So that's going to be Exodus 21:2 through 6. Exodus chapter 21, verses 2 through 6. Number 190, not to compel the Hebrew servant to do work of a slave. You understand there is a difference between a servant and a slave, right? So, not to compel the Hebrew servant to do the work of a slave. Leviticus 25:39. Leviticus 25:39. So that's a different status, right? And please remember that the slave that they are talking about in biblical times and what we are saying is not the transatlantic slave trade, the chattel slavery that we experienced here in America. No one on earth has ever experienced that type of slavery. So that is not what they're talking about. Slaves were treated fairly well in biblical times, right? It was more of a servitude versus that. So don't think that that's the same thing. So a servant would have a job, like it would be like a butler or a maid or something like that, and then um, a, a slave in that time would be in servitude. They may have owed a bond or something. They would actually still get paid, and they could buy their freedom, or they can pay their debt and go free. So it was for a certain amount of time as well, and they were not mistreated. So be very clear on that. All right. 191, not to sell a Hebrew servant as a slave. Not to serve a Hebrew servant as a slave. Leviticus 25:42. Leviticus 25:42. Right? Number 192, not to treat a Hebrew servant rigorously. Not to mistreat your Hebrew servant. So, not to treat a Hebrew servant rigorously. Leviticus 25:43. Leviticus 25:43. Like I'm saying, whether it's your servant or your employee, the Most High is making very sure that we treat our servants and our employees justly, fairly, and kindly. We are not to be mean to our people. All right. 193. Not to permit a Gentile to treat harshly a Hebrew bondsman sold to him. Not to permit a Gentile to treat harshly a Hebrew bondsman sold to him. Leviticus 25:53. Leviticus 25:53. 194. Not to send away a Hebrew bondsman servant empty handed when he is freed from service. Not to send away a Hebrew bondsman servant empty handed when he is freed from service. Remember, I said they're freed. So Deuteronomy 15:13. Deuteronomy 15:13. Once their time's up and they are freed, the Most High is saying, bless them. Send them away with something, with money, with food, clothing, whatever. Don't send them away empty handed. We are to be good to our people, right? This is a level of brotherhood and sisterhood that our community has not been used to for a long time, but this is what thus says the Lord. This is how it used to be, and we need to build that bond back. We need to not mistreat one another. We need to be fair and kind to one another, right? 195. To bestow liberal gifts upon the Hebrew bondsman. To bestow liberal gifts upon the Hebrew bondsman at the end of his term of service. And the same should be done to the Hebrew bondwoman. And the same should be done to the Hebrew bondwoman. Deuteronomy 15:14. Deuteronomy 15:14. A lot of people get upset when I say this, but the Most High is fair and just. He does not mistreat women. He wants the same standard to be given to the Hebrew bondwoman as the bondmen. He loves his daughters. Do not let these crazy ass camps and these crazy ass churches tell you that the woman is evil and God don't care about the woman and the man is on the rock. No, that's not what God says. Okay? He's very fair. He loves his daughter. He loves his daughters. He calls us his princesses. So you can't not mistreat the woman and expect God to be good to you, right? All right, so let's go to the next one here. Let me make sure I'm going back to the right place. All right, here we are. 196. To redeem a Hebrew maidservant. That's a female servant. To redeem a Hebrew maidservant. Exodus 21:8. Exodus 21:8. Not to sell a Hebrew maidservant to another person. Not to sell a Hebrew maidservant to another person. Exodus 21:8. Exodus 21:8. 198. To espouse a Hebrew male servant. To espouse a Hebrew maid servant. Exodus 28, 8 through 9. Sorry, I said that wrong. Exodus 21, 8 through 9. To espouse a Hebrew maid servant. Exodus 21, 8 through 9. 199. To keep the Canaanite slave forever. Leviticus 25:46. To keep the Canaanite slave forever. Leviticus 25:46. There is history behind that. Look and see what happened between the Hebrews and the Canaanites to see why the Most High would say that. Now, the Canaanite is a Hamite, an African, right? So please be clear that the Hebrew is a Negro or a Shemite. We are different people. We have black skin, yes, but we are different people. So you need to go find out what the Canaanites and the Hebrew Israelites went through and why the Most High is saying that he's not being evil. There is a reason. Do your research. All right. So 200. Not to surrender a slave who has fled to the land of Israel to his owner who lives outside of Palestine. Not to surrender a slave who has fled to the land of Israel to his owner who lives outside of Palestine. So if a slave who's harshly mistreated outside of Israel, like from Palestine area, if he's fled and he came into Israel for refuge, we don't let them go back. Mm-mm. Most High said, don't let them go back. So Deuteronomy 23:16. Deuteronomy 23:16. We show kindness and we protect. All right. 201, not to wrong such a slave. So if that slave did come and he made it to Israel and he's seeking refuge there and help and protection, we don't treat that slave wrong. We treat them right. So on the next commandment, 201, is saying not to wrong such a slave. That's going to be Deuteronomy 23:17. Deuteronomy 23:17. Number 202, not to muzzle a beast while it is working. In not to muzzle a beast while it is working in produce which it can eat and enjoy. So just like the human worker that's harvesting produce, we use animals to do that as well. If the animal is hungry, you can't muzzle it, let it freely eat as it's working. So it says not to muzzle a beast while it is working in produce which it can eat and enjoy. Deuteronomy 25:4. Deuteronomy 25:4. So that is very important. The Most High shows his kindness to the animals that are working for us, to the slaves that are working with to us, who are not treated harshly at all, and to our servants who are not treated harshly at all, and to our employees. They should be treated fairly and with respect. All right, I'm going to end this one and go to the next two after this. I'm going to go ahead and do another video just to get us pushed on with the time. All right, I love you guys. Take care.